Hey, everybody on YouTube and Zoom. We'll get started here in about 30 seconds to a minute. Just want to welcome everybody in and look forward to today's webinar. Stuart, Ken, you guys ready?
Shoot.
Okay.
Sure.
Hey, I just want to welcome everybody to the USA Hockey webinar series presented by BioSteel and Pure Hockey. Really excited for the guests all week, but especially for today. We have Stuart Armstrong, who is head of coaching for Sport England and also the host of the Talent Equation podcast. So he has 142 episodes. I've listened to everyone probably a couple of times, most of them. They're great stuff. And, you know, he's a guy that, you know, for me personally, I look to as a mentor, and the stuff that he does is just, you know, it's so practical, so deep that he talks about, but trying to incorporate into my coaching. So really happy to have you here, Stuart. Just want to welcome you.
I'm delighted to be here, Dave. It's kind of interesting to be on the receiving end because ordinarily I'm hosting you and we're having a chat. Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Great to be with my friends from over the water. We both involved in sports with sticks. I have to run around. You guys can glide about and look graceful. So it's a slightly different context. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to the chat, and I'm really impressed that you counted up all the episodes because I don't number them. So the fact you know that there's 142, that's news to me. So that's really cool.
Hey, that's what a good host does. They have to look into and find and dig deep. So we also have our technical director for the ADM, Ken Martell on. So Ken works out of Colorado Springs, and he's been with USA Hockey for quite a number of years. And I just want to welcome you too, Ken.
Thanks, Dave.
So just want to get started here. And, you know, I said that you host the Talent Equation, but also head of coaching for Sport England. But you have a varied background with lots of different sports and different ways within England. Can you talk me through how you got started and when you started, you know, working as a coach and how that all progressed?
Well, I guess, how did I start getting involved as a coach? Well, I guess I'm one of these kids that can just started getting really interested into sport and just wanted to play every single sport. And you know, if I saw it on TV, I wanted to play it. And not only did I want to play it, I wanted to find out how to be really good at it, or as good as I could be at it. So you know, NBA came on TV over here, started playing basketball, played at club level, half decent point guard considering I can't jump. But you know, like to think I can handle a ball. Played American football as well. I'm like the world's slowest wide receiver and cornerback. So basically, they used to run me on the little inside routes and just get pummeled by linebackers. Didn't last long, but I really loved playing the game. We used to play at school all the time. And I played a whole range of different sports. If it was on TV, I was going to play it. And what I always do in trying to learn to get better at it was I design little games to play. And so any of the games that I'm involved with, you know, I play a lot of cricket, played a lot of football, played a lot of rugby, hockey, everything else. It was always about playing little small games against my brother or with my friends and creating leagues and all those sorts of things. And that's kind of where it started, I think. That's where my kind of interest in getting better at sport became. I was born with a disability as well. And because I had some limitations in my feet, it also made me sort of I had to adapt a little bit. So I became really kind of astute. So I played international field hockey and as a junior. And, you know, if you're not fast, which I'm not, your options are pretty limited. So what you've got to do is you've got to think quicker. You've got to be more tactically astute. You've got to work out who around you can help you. You've got to work out what they're doing ahead of time. So I became kind of analytical about the game. And that took me into kind of a bit of a journey of coaching. But my career in sport came about. I actually wanted to be a graphic designer. I was really into drawing. And my art teacher caught me on the field hockey pitch for the 15th time instead of being in his art class. And he said, "You should have a career in sport, son." And that proved to be the best career advice I was given. And so that's how I ended up on my career journey.
And before you worked for Sport England, you were working for UK coaching. Is that?
Before Sport England, I was actually with rugby. I was with England Rugby for about 3.5 years. I was their player pathways manager. So I was looking at kind of right from kind of mini rugby all the way through to sort of the base level of the talent pathway and moving into the professional game and trying to create the kind of journey and the pathways there, and almost looking at what does the entry point to the game look like and how can we reimagine it for different people with different sets of needs. And then prior to that, I had a good stint of time, good 8-9 years working in golf. Looking at, I devised a game called Try Golf, which is like a primary entry game, which is soft, and you can play with 30 kids in a small area and get the ball in the air. And so I guess I've always been designing game forms to help people get involved in and get excited about a game, and then helping them sort of be involved. I even had a little period for about 18 months working in the private sector. I worked for a company called Power Play Golf that was trying to create like this short form 9-hole game that had 2 flags on every green. It was really super exciting. We lasted about a year, and then a whole load of things happened and it kind of fell apart, but it was a really, really good time. So I've always been into the kind of innovation side of sport and trying to find new ways to play and new exciting approaches. So yeah, that's definitely been my career path so far.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we appreciate so much about your background is that you've had experience with so many different sports at a variety of levels, and you've done such a good job of sharing information. You've created communities of practice. I think you've been a real leader in this space for not just those in your country, but I think really for a lot of us around the globe.
Well, I feel very honored to hear you say that, Ken. I have to say, I guess it's one of those things where some years ago, sort of the birth of the internet, again, not the birth of the internet, because that sounds like I'm going really far back, but I got really into blogging. And the reason I got into blogging actually was I was on my coaching journey, and I knew that, reflection was a really important thing. And I'm a little bit lazy by nature. So I'm kind of always want to try and do 2 things at the same time. So I thought, well, if I'm going to document my reflections, what I may as well do is write down what I'm reading and learning and share it with other people. So I started a blogger account and started to talk, and then lo and behold, people started to listen, like read it and like comment and ask me questions. And I'm like, well, I don't know. And then it built from there. And I've loved podcasts forever, right? And I've been wanting to start a podcast for so many years, and I've run out of time, and it's difficult and technical. And then starting the podcast again, in some respects, was partly about I'd really like to have some more conversations with people about coaching. And it struck me that the way to get them on was to say it was for a podcast. So that's kind of how I was able to get people like your good self on to come and talk to me and have some really fascinating. So it's been a fantastic journey of learning. And I just believe that if the whole of the coaching community took it upon themselves to share just one thing a year with somebody else publicly, a reflection, a blog, a journal, an article, whatever it might be, what a great place we'd be in, that kind of whole peer support world. And I suppose that's the mission, to try and encourage more of that to happen.
Well, I mentioned to Dave that I was going to ask you this ahead of time, but my first experience with Stuart Armstrong was stumbling across one of your podcasts, and it was right through a time frame where it was the Stuart Armstrong's personal war on drills. And that kind of hit a tone with us, because we were going through the same thing, kind of looking at our sport, how it was being delivered. Was it fun for kids? And was it productive for kids? Were they gaining hockey sense and the ability to play and those things? So that really resonated with us. So could you explain a little bit about the Stuart Armstrong personal war on drills? Because I think that's an underlying theme that you've continued with.
Yeah, I think it'll probably end up being on my gravestone. Probably. In fact, I'm not sure if I've got it. Oh yeah, I've got the merch with the Ditch Those Drills merchandise on the back.
Where can we buy one of those?
Yeah, it's a limited edition at the moment, but watch this space. It's coming out soon, hopefully. I've just got to find the right supply chains, which aren't easy at the moment.
No, not a bit.
what was I going to say? Yeah. So where did it start? Well, that was the very early days of the podcast. And if I remember rightly, the very first War on Drills episode was me actually walking from the train station to my office. And it was really, I guess, the start of this has been on my mind for a long time. I need to sort of write this down. This is kind of a good thing to start with. I'll start with a bit of a kind of personal rant about what I don't like about, or why I think we need to move away from drills. But the embers of that, where it started from, was quite a number of years earlier. Well, several years earlier. So I mentioned to you at the start that as a child, we played games, right? So we were the classic backyard games kids, right? Our driveways, we named them after famous cricket pitches in the world, right? Because they all had different characteristics, and we had different rules for different driveways because they had different characteristics. We invented golf courses around our gardens using, like, the airflow balls and stuff like that. It was all about games. If we were practicing, I'd try and make it more difficult for myself by using like a thinner bat and all that sort of stuff. So I was kind of doing a constraints type approach before I even obviously had ever heard of a constraints type approach. But it's modifications and trying to improve, and quite a lot of self-taught stuff as well. Yeah, I had some coaches, but most of the time we were just spend all day long in the practice areas and playing games and creating. And my abiding childhood memory, right, is it being so like disappointing when your parents called you in for dinner, or when you knew you had to go home because it was dark, and it's like, we can't play anymore. We tried all sorts to try and keep playing, but you just couldn't see, so you had to go home. And it's so like disappointing because the game is so kind of absorbing, and there's no better game in the world than a 29-all game of soccer or something along those lines, right? So that's my childhood. And then I entered the world of coaching, and I learned about coaching, and I learned how to do it properly. And what I learned about doing it properly was that we had to use this process where you break everything down into its bite-sized component chunks, and you work on the technique, and then you develop your technique, and then you apply it in a game. And if you're lucky, you get a game. And then, and I'm like, I'm doing that. And a little part of me is just feeling, but it's the proper way to do it. So, you got to follow the path. So I doubled down on it, right? And then I start my coaching. I get a bit of success, right? Working with some men's teams at the national level, doing some decent stuff. But I'm finding myself equally, something inside me is a bit, not sure about this. And then what I found myself becoming was not really very nice. And, I was getting quite agitated. I would be quite aggressive. I'd be quite on the sidelines. I'd be very vocal. And, we do lots and lots of super high level, super detailed, like proper, artistically detailed, repetitive pattern stuff, right? You follow that move. And we were like, really super organized, and that gets you so far. And then you come up against a team that just works it out, and they know how to deal with you. And the team can't deal with that because they've got a pattern that they follow and they can't do anything else. And then you find yourself like, missing out on a league championship by like 3 points. And it was just down to that 1 or 2 games. And what's going on? So I started looking for answers, because I was doubling down. If we didn't win, we need more structure, not less, more. So more. And each time there's a little part of me, I felt like there's a little part of me that was just dying inside. Like my little part of my soul was being torn out of me, because it's not what I was as a child, and it's not what I enjoyed as a child. And I didn't really enjoy doing it as a coach, but I didn't really see an alternative. It was the only option. And then, so I start looking around, and a really famous field hockey coach, like super, super famous and like successful Australian field hockey coach called Rick Charlesworth. Like he coached the Hockeyroos, like the female field hockey side. They were all conquering, right? Beat everybody for years, multiple gold medals. And he talked about this thing called designer games. And I heard the word games and thought, hello, there's something in here. And that took me on a journey towards teaching games for understanding, game sense, and a range of other different things. And this was sort of loads of information being available to everybody in the palm of their hand. This was like, had to go to a library and get a book and get it out and read it or buy it. And remember that, we had to do that. So,
way back then.
Yeah. So you're digging around in all this stuff, and then so I start playing around with it, and I'm like but I like the idea of it, right? And so for a long time, I thought I was doing a really good games-based approach. Turns out I wasn't. I was doing like a hybrid, horrible version, neither here nor there. Then I get fortunate, right? So through my career, I've met some fantastically interesting people like Rick Shuttleworth, people like Keith Davids, people like Russell Earnshaw, and all these sorts of stuff. And they absolutely turned my worldview upside down. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, what the hell have I been doing for 20 years? I'm sorry to anybody who came across me. And I say that quite regularly. So that's it, really. That's the kind of, this is who I am. This is kind of what I was about as a child. This is what I think children are looking for in their experiences. We're then saying, no, we're going to make it a bit more like school for you because it's got to be done properly. And I'm thinking to myself, what kind of world can that be? If we're trying to, tackle inactivity and we're trying to encourage people to do more and more sport physical activity, we've got to get a love going. And part of the love comes from the play and the game. And so that's why I'm so passionate about it.
I think, for our staff, we're a bit on the same journey where a lot of us, our backgrounds were in high performance sport. And, we all said we valued this game sense, that player that was creative. Yet then when you take a step back and you look at what we do in practice and you scratch your head and say, well, wait a second, this doesn't seem to be encouraging that, because everything is scripted, everything is a pattern. And then when our players don't play with creativity, they're like, well, isn't that our fault? I mean, at some level, we have to take responsibility because we've been putting the kids into these drills and working in that manner. So I think for a lot of us on our staff, it's the self-realization that it wasn't going like we wanted. So at some level, you got to turn around and look in the mirror and go like, well, what can I be doing here? What more can we be doing? And should we be operating differently? And then when you start looking around and exposed to more things, that's there's a big world out there. So
one of the things that I'll talk about when I start talking about slides, but one of the things that I was really keen to explain to people, because needless to say, I didn't expect the kind of response I got from the war on drills. I thought, I wanted to pique some interest, and I guess it was a little bit of clickbait. I guess, I wanted to get people to think, what the hell's this guy talking about? I wanted to stimulate a debate, right? What I didn't realize was it was going to follow me around for the next 10 years. But one of the things I want to be clear about is kind of like, what is a drill? Because we use the word drill, right, as to mean a lot of different things. It means a lot of different things to a lot of people. Like any kind of exercise or practice is a drill to some people, right? I categorize drills very, very specifically, right? I think they're one small component, and actually, in fact, can go through a typology of different practice activities that actually define the way we might do this. We might explore that a little bit later on. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think I see a drill as being something very, very isolated, kind of very much about cues, waiting their turn, usually, there's no other opponent. You're just literally kind of following a pattern or going around some cones or pylons or whatever it might be. And that I consider to be a kind of a drill. Yeah. And then anything you do beyond a drill, you're starting to move more towards a game. And actually, you can gamify drills quite easily, and therefore you can almost make them much more interesting immediately. So I just wanted to be clear about that before we started.
Yeah, no, I think that's the same sort of definition that we use internally here at USA Hockey. All decisions have been made ahead of time for the player.
Yeah, exactly.
So Stu, I want you to, kind of going on the games and working with your athletes, I want you to talk about your development journey with your players, not giving them all the answers and letting them make decisions, kind of what Ken was talking about before we kind of get going.
Well, it's a pretty challenging thing, right? So you've done it this way for a long time, and that's what you know. And then all of a sudden you realize that that's actually not only potentially counterproductive, not only counterproductive from what you're trying to achieve, but actually it's also can be quite challenging for the individuals. And certainly for me, it was an easy decision to make because I'd just felt this sense that was wrong. But then you're in the wilderness then, aren't you? Because you go, I've always known this, and now I've got to do something else. And now I've got to start, and it's like a leap of faith, and it's almost like starting again, beginning again. And so I went through a period of what I call the wilderness years, and I also went through a period of proper what I call experimentation. And there was no one to talk to. It's another reason why I'm so passionate about the podcast and the communities of learning and all the other opportunities, because I didn't have any of that. I was just working through stuff myself, very much in the wilderness, trying to work it through, trying to find different ways of approaching these different things. And I guess, I had players who were just prepared to come with me on the journey. But what I found was I got this really interesting response. So initially it was a little bit like, what the hell's going on? What are you doing? Why are you not talking to us anymore? Why aren't you saying anything? Why are we just playing games? Why aren't we doing all that? Why aren't you numbering the cones and telling us which one to go to after? Why isn't the color coding happening? Why isn't all this? Why does it feel a bit more chaotic? So there was a lot of questions like that. And I had to do what I call selling the why, right? So I had to sort of explain to them all the way through, right? Going through a different journey now. This is much more about you guys making decisions. This is much more about you guys finding a way through this. We've been too structured, too robotic. We need to find a new way. So we went through that journey together, and it wasn't easy. And I made some big mistakes through that. I got some relegations and things like that while I was on that learning journey. And it was a difficult period, right? Because I was going through that learning process, but really, really valuable. I learned an awful lot about
it. It's hard too, right? I mean, you're on that. You were success. Now you go the other direction a little bit. That the pull maybe for some people and some coaches to just go back to what you were doing.
And many times I thought about it, trust me, and probably a couple of times I did, but because you haven't got any other answers. But again, that's another point where if I just had someone to talk to, the answer was right in front of my nose. Yeah. It just took me 6 weeks to get there when it would have taken me six minutes.
Yeah.
So that was the journey, and there was trial and error, but it was worth it. And the reason it was worth it was I just kept getting such fantastic feedback. And the feedback wasn't necessarily from the players themselves. I could see the joy. I felt better. I felt the joy. I went from the period of, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore, to, and I just had a little baby as well. And it was a bit like, my wife saying to me, really, you carrying on? I'm a bit like, well, just a couple more years, and then, and I kept, but you could see the joy, right? And I could feel the joy. And it's been a long time since I'd felt that joy. But then also, I found myself in a scenario where I could see things happening in front of my eyes that I'd never seen before. And those moments were honestly like, ooh, they were almost a bit addictive, because it's like, oh, wow, look at this happening now. This is different. And that's what kept me coming back.
Well, as coaches, that's one of the, you want to help. You want to, that's part of who most coaches are. Like they want to see kids having joy. They want to see kids improving. They want that for the kids that they work with. So, that's kind of all the crack that we all crave sometimes, right? I mean,
yeah.
So you can absolutely get that.
Yeah, so that's the journey I've been on, Dave. Ups and downs and all that sort of stuff. But I do think now there's greater opportunities for coaches to tap into some of this information and to be able to then learn from each other. There's a better community now. We're more connected than we ever were. We're able to do things like this across thousands of miles if we need to. There's people you can access. There's people prepared to give more time. You guys are doing fabulous work to support your coaches and all that sort of stuff. And so you don't have to be as on your own as you used to be. There's far more support to do this. It doesn't have to be such a difficult period. I mean, there's bound to be some challenge, because it has to be. That's part of the growth and the learning process. But it's not as, you're not as on your own, So I make it sound like it, like, don't ever do this. This is a nightmare. It's not. It's actually much more rewarding than you think.
Cool. That's interesting. So do you want to get started on your presentation or your small chat?
I'll share my screen. Let me just.
I just want to remind everybody on YouTube Live and then also on Zoom, use the chat function if you have any questions or any issues with what's going on in terms of technical or whatever. But use the Q&A box if you're on Zoom to answer or ask any questions. And if you're on YouTube Live, just make sure that when we're on the chat, we're just talking about what's going on here. We don't need stuff talking about who knows what. So I'll be sure to delete any of those comments. And some people are talking about return to rinks and all that great stuff, but let's just keep it to Stewart and what he's doing. So thank you.
Okay. Everybody, I'm assuming you can see that.
Yes.
Yeah, you're all good. Okay, so what I'm talking about a little bit is I actually, interestingly, I got this title from some dog trainers, and I've got she's about 14 months old now, little spaniel, and she's one of those what I call naughty but nice dogs. She's like lovely, but every now and again she just like has to run off to either go and be friends with another dog, or particularly if she sees a squirrel, then there's just no stopping her. And I found this podcast called Sexier Than a Squirrel. And it's like, wow, that's really interesting. I like the idea of that. And then I found out that basically they do all their dog training through games. I'm like, haha, you got me, right? I'm in. And they have this whole thing called We Got a Game for That. So all of their training ideas are based around these ideas of games. And it's been interesting because I've been actually following some of the journeys. And as a result of that, little Flo, the dog, is she's getting there. She's doing some interesting things. And so we're making some progress. But so I thought I'd use that as a title, but also this is around being about like your practices and how you can use kind of be really intentional in your practice design and in your games. So when we talk about practice design, I just wanted to share with you this little video. 再见我的爱，再见我的国家，再见我的眼泪。Now, the reason I'm showing you that is it's been doing the rounds on the internet quite a lot, but that's basically like every practice I've ever run in my life, or it feels like I have, because I designed this nice, neat and tidy, really well organized thing, and then the kids find all the ways to break it and use the rules. But actually, what I've learned to understand over the years is that they're the moments you need to live for. They're the moment when the kids are thinking about the game in such a way that they're finding ways to beat your game. Now you've got people who are you've got young people who are really beginning to think through how they can approach learning and what they need to do within their environment to be able to play more effectively. So that was the kind of starting point. So I just want to reflect for a second on this concept of player or athlete centered. And it's a phrase we hear a lot, and it's a phrase that people use a lot. Now, in my mind, player centeredness is a bit of a nebulous idea, right? So people think it's like you're either player centered or you aren't. It's not like that, right? Player centeredness is on a spectrum, and being athlete or player centered is determined by a range of different factors: the capabilities of the individual, the task that you have at hand, and also the environment in which you're working. And so how player centeredness comes across to people is very much defined by what you're trying to achieve at that moment with those individuals in the space that you're in. And so you need to take those into consideration. And so to be player-centered can look and feel very different. You could walk into somebody's space and go, that's not very athlete-centered. That's being very command and control. But actually, in that moment, it is actually what the athletes are requiring and what they need. And we are, as coaches, piggy in the middle. We're always trying to match between needs and wants. We want to ensure that the athletes are going to get what they need in order to help them develop and improve and then ultimately perform. But at the same time, very few of us have got, unless we're in particular environments, very few of us have got athletes that, are purely based on the performance outcomes. Most of them are there for fun, enjoyment, participation, be with friends, all those things that Heather Mannix, who works with you guys at USA Hockey, talks about as part of her research that she did with Amanda Visek around what makes sport fun for kids. I know she's been on one of your webinars in the last couple of weeks. Unfortunately, I missed it, but I'm a huge fan of all the work that they've done. And if there was a Nobel Prize for coaching or an equivalent, I'd be nominating them for the research they've done because it's been so useful. Anyway, now in the participation realm, it's much more about what the players want. If they're not going to get something that they really want, then they're probably just going to drop out eventually. They might stay for a while, but eventually they're probably going to. And we all see dropout rates. So I feel like what we've got to do is we've got to try and make sure that we can find the balance between the two. And the challenge we have sometimes is I think sometimes we're a bit too focused on the performance and the needs, and we don't take care of the wants. And so we're trying to find that balancing act. It's a little bit like, when I'm making a meal for my children, they'll happily eat what we see on the right-hand side of this screen. They'll happily eat the burgers and the fries, and they're not going to eat any of the vegetables and the broccoli. In fact, I had that battle this evening with a plate of food, which was fries, there was some chicken, and there was, oh my God, some sweet corn. Oh, that's the end of the world. But anyway, we managed to get through that. There was a deal made, as you always have to make a deal on, don't you? And then, and we got to the end point. But with my kids, if I only fed them broccoli, well, they probably wouldn't eat very much. But likewise, if I only gave them the burgers and stuff, then they're not going to get that. They're not going to get the sort of nutrition that they need either. So what we need is something that's going to be both nutritious and tasty. That's what our practice should be like. It should, you're going to get some good at it, but it's got to taste really good and really, really exciting. So we need the practice design equivalent of broccoli burgers. This is an actual thing. I got it on the internet. There are recipes. I've tried a couple. Not sure they've got them right yet. And interestingly, I think this is my mission, right? With the challenge I'm presenting to coaches, the challenges I'm presenting to people out there is, how can you design activities and games and these that are both nourishing and helping with improvement and development and this, that, and the other, but at the same time, super tasty. They're going to be like, oh, I want more of that. Let me do more. Let me have more of that. Let me do that. And then we keep bringing them back every single week, and we get that intrinsic motivation and the excitement. So that's the challenge that we're faced with. That's the sort of mission. I use this term playperation. So it's a bit about like play, but it's also sort of preparing. So it's preparation and playing at the same time, morphed into one. I think there's a word, I think, for when you morph words together. I'm not sure what it is, but I like to do that a little bit. So and playperation for me is a bit like, you're going to get, you're going to get some repetition, but it'll be without repetition. You're going to get people to do the things over and again. So and Rick Shuttleworth talks about this a lot. He says, you're getting people to repeat the process of finding the solution, not repeat the solution. Repeat the process of finding the solution, not repeating the solution, because the solution is pre-given. What we're saying is, you're going to find it, but we're going to give you lots of time to have a go at finding it. We're going to keep perception and action coupled. So, I'm not always sure about the use of this language, but what we're saying is that we want what people are seeing, feeling, sensing to be connected with what they're doing, and not desensitizing them from what's around them in the environment and isolating them from that so it's only them. We see a lot in soccer, for example. People talk about ball mastery, and they spend a lot of time in isolated movements just doing ball mastery without thinking about, how do I master the ball in order to avoid an opponent? And so where possible, we're always going to bring an opponent into the mix so that we can develop their perceptual awareness of what an opponent's doing whilst learning the action possibilities. We want to see failure, definitely, but we want to create an environment that is safe to fail, and we want to foster that. We want to use designer games. We want to have a lot of implicit feedback that comes from the game itself. So the feedback doesn't have to come from us. It can come from the game itself, and sometimes from the athletes to each other. And we want to try where we can to do as much as possible to have an idea of co-creation and less about correction. I find that very challenging, I have to say, because I have been brought up on a diet of correction. That's what I do. I look for things that I can correct and improve, and I step in to offer my pearls of wisdom. And what I'm trying to do now, working hard on, is working with an athlete on co-creating a possible alternatives, and that's quite a dynamic thing and quite powerful, but also quite difficult. So here's a bit of a statement: technique and skill are not the same. Now, most people are probably going, yeah, duh, yeah, of course. And I know this is a learned group, because you've all decided to spend your afternoon, evening listening to me, and you probably know that, but you'd be amazed at how many people use the term skill when they actually mean technique. So kind of what's the difference? Well, the difference between skill and technique I'll talk about in a minute, but basically skill for me is technique and context. So as I mentioned earlier on, a technique applied in context is a skill. And so traditionally, the linear approach that where I kind of got my learning from, and where we were taught how to break things down, is learn the technique and then apply it into the context, and you will become skillful. Well, there's another way of looking at this, and another body of evidence that suggests that we could do that a different way. And the way we could do it differently is to consider this what you call a non-linear approach, where we start with the context first, and then the technique emerges as a response to whatever is in the context. So whatever's going on in the environment that they're in, whether it's a practice design of some kind, there is some information taking place. And that information, depending on how the athlete interprets that information, determines how they might act. And so what we see is technique becomes an emergent property, because what we're seeing is that there's an environment there, and people are responding to the environment in different ways, and they're developing different movement solutions and different movement patterns, utilizing whatever implement that they use. In both in field hockey and ice hockey, it's a stick. And they're moving, on the ice or on the pitch in different ways in order to respond to whatever the context provides them. But in this sort of emerging body of evidence, and when I say emerging, it's been around for 50 years, but this body of evidence is suggesting to us that what we need to do is to think about the context first, and then enable athletes to explore different techniques as a response to the context. And that becomes very powerful, because when you've learned to move in a certain way, utilizing a particular context, it stays with you because you've learned it understanding the game at the same time. So you become not only do you become excellent technically, but you become excellent technically in relation to what's going on in the game. And so you become what I call a tactician as opposed to a technician. You are able to blend tactic and technique together. So one of the major players, if you like, or one of the major sort of researchers in the space of non-linear, what they call non-linear pedagogy, non-linear coaching, is this absolute gentleman by the name of Keith Davids, who I've been fortunate enough to meet on several occasions, and has always been extremely generous with his time. He's been on the podcast a few times as well, and very, very learned and very prepared to explore a range of different coaching challenges. And one of my favorite quotes he uses is this quote of, "You can't adapt to an environment that you don't inhabit." His point is that we as humans throughout history have adapted to our environment. It's kind of what's given us our advantage in nature, I suppose. And we've learned to adapt in certain ways. And it's based on this principle, what they call an ecological principle, ecological dynamics, that actually if we can devise different environments and then humans can adapt to those environments, then we find ourselves emerging from those environments with different movement solutions. So it's quite an interesting and exciting way of approaching things. But if you're going to do that, then designing the environment becomes everything. You have to become that kind of learning architect. Keith talks about a learning architect, creating an environment where learning can take place. And I don't know if you've ever seen Ken Robinson. He's had about 30 million views on TED, and he talks a lot about creativity. He's based in the States, but he's a Brit. He's an export. And he just talks about this idea that it's, human flourishing isn't mechanical. You can't predict it. All you can do is create an environment or the conditions under which they can flourish. So we have to think like a farmer, not like a machinist, when we think about creating these kinds of ecological environments that allow young people to flourish. I use a lot of metaphors, as you may have discovered, and I think of learning environments like kind of gardens or aspects of nature. So if you've ever seen a kind of a Baroque garden, or a, kind of one of those very ordered and structured gardens that, all the hedges are really tightly trimmed and exactly where everything is, and the herbs are here and the flowers are here and the whatever else. I'm not a gardener, but over that, I don't know why I use a gardener metaphor. And that's a little bit like where the sort of traditional approach is, where you see it's very controlled, fixed and prescriptive. Knowledge is taught, and the coach is more like an instructor. But then you can also think of a learning environment like a family garden, like the garden that I have, where we're all based at the moment. If we're fortunate enough to have a garden, I've just been out doing lightsaber battles with my kids. We're basically a day late on Star Wars Day, May the 4th, but we found the lightsabers. So our after-school club today was lightsaber battles. There was a few battered thumbs, but it's interesting how I had to be the dark side, obviously, but you know, we managed to. Anyway, no more Star Wars. Sorry, all I'll say is I was victorious. But then again, you know, I am bigger than them, so I suppose I should be. Anyway, back to the gardens. The family garden, right? It's constrained, so the kids can go. They can do whatever they like in that garden, and if you look at it, you will see that they do. There's very little grass left, and they can use all the equipment they want to, and they do. But you know, it's still safe and framed, and it's descriptive, and they learn things, and knowledge to them is revealed a little bit more by their discoveries within that garden. And then there's times, if I'm their coach, where I act as the teacher, and I'll say, like, this is so, you don't know how to do that yet, right? I'll show you how to sort of bang this wood together so you can make a seesaw or whatever it is we're going to create on the day. But you can also, and they're what you call like the content-based or the subject-based learning models, where there's something to be learned and the teacher or the coach knows those things, and they're going to impart that information to the athlete or player. There's an alternative paradigm on the other side, which is more experience or problem-based. So you can have a meadow. Again, a meadow, you know, you can only go so far, but you've got a lot more space to wander. You can be much more creative. It's much more flexible. You can go into different parts of the meadow and explore different parts of the meadow. You can come back to the path if you want to. A lot of choice as to where you want to go. And through that process, you discover a lot about what's in the meadow and what you can do in the meadow and the things that are available to you. And if you've got a coach with you, they might be your guide, and they might help you go through the meadow and experience different things and take you on a bit of a journey. So it's not completely, you know, you just on your own, not where you want to go. And then you can think of other learning environments as pure wilderness. They're very chaotic, fluid, explorative, and you're discovering knowledge all the time. And in that case, I describe the coach as a sense maker. And what in that scenario there, the coach is almost saying, I haven't got any idea of where we're going to go. All I can do is to maybe help you make some decisions as we go on the journey together. So you place yourself as a coach alongside the learner, you become a learner with them, and you say, right, what do we have around us through probing and questioning and everything else? What questions can we ask ourselves? How can we discover things that we're going to be able to help us move through this journey and make progress and see where we get to and what have you? So it's a slightly different approach. Now, I'm not saying any of these approaches are better or worse than the others. I just think that the bulk of the coaching that I've done and I learned and the education I had was very much on the left-hand side. I'm there to teach something, and my planning and my design was based like that. And now I'm working much more on the other side in the meadow and in the wilderness and trying to place myself in there a little bit more and trying to either be the guide or the sense maker wherever I can. Because what I'm finding is that the athletes, they can be really very young, know way more than I think, and and can do things way different than I would have thought to. So I found that I was constraining them far too much when I was operating in the Baroque garden. So there's actually a really good researcher, James G, who's based in the States, done loads of work on video games, who's pretty influential in this space, but just talks about game design principles. So I wanted to share with you some game design principles that I think are very important and stay very close to me. So the first one is that within game design, you need to be like a multi-tool. That's like a Swiss Army knife, right? So there's like a multi-tool. It's not about stabbing people. And we're putting performance before competence, right? And you get an opportunity to learn by doing. You're trying different ways of solving a particular problem. They also want really good games allow players to reach standards in different ways and in different amount of time. So it takes into consideration differentiation, and it recognizes that not everybody has to move at the same pace. And if we're not going to move on until everybody's at the same pace, and so that's a very important aspect when we're trying to be more inclusive in our practice and take people with different learning needs and a whole range of different, kind of experiences. And so a great game allows people to approach the game in their own way and find a way to be successful within it. And then also, we can foster social interaction through play that's both collaborative and competitive. And that's something that I think is really important, is the idea of collaborative play as opposed to the competitive side only. And then the other side as well is players are going to face new levels and problems that challenge the mastery they've developed. So we're always stretching them just a little bit beyond their capabilities. If you think about any great video game, they're always close. You can nearly get there and you can nearly make an improvement. And it's just got you hooked, and that's what brings you back. And those kinds of games are really, really smart. And if we can create our games to be similar, then we get a lot of stickability. And you get, a really, really rich learning. They also have stories. And so one of the things I've used a lot now is the idea of creating a narrative around my game. So it's usually got a mission or a kind of an aim or a quest or something along those lines, and trying to create a narrative around the game, and then actually encouraging the players to be part of that narrative and create their own stories. And so allow them to have a lot of choice, and actually even discover, we'd like to go here and we'd like to do this. That's super. We'll do that. That's excellent. Let's do that. Or I park that for a second because we're going to come there soon. You're thinking ahead already. Let's just stay here and wait till we get to that moment in the quest or the mission. You see it, right? It's in front of you, right? Because you're designing the game and you can see how they're learning, because how well they do when you stretch them later and later. So you actually get the opportunity to measure their performance. And then also what you'll then see as well is that the game design, if it's right, the players actually have to think like designers even to play. They have to figure out the rule system in the game and how it can be used to accomplish their goals. I played a cricket game last year, and we had a group of players, and I gave them the rules, and then we based it on Fortnite, and they had each player had a grenade, and the grenade was when you were going to bowl or pitch, and like in baseball, you roll your grenade, and it meant if you got somebody out, you kind of got big points. But if you got it wrong, you also got minus points. And one player, he was the captain of the team, said, I said, you haven't used up your grenades. He says, I know, we're saving them all to the end. I've got my best bowler. He's going to deliver all of our grenades. Now, I hadn't said he couldn't do it. And I thought, that's smart. He's thought it through. And he went and he got his best bowler to bowl all his grenades. Now, his best bowler crumbled under the pressure and they massively lost the game, but it was a really valuable learning moment for them all. So it was a really interesting experience that I had there. So this concept of representative learning design, it's a way I use, it's a little tool or a little framework that I use to help me think about where I want to be in my design. Now, there's like different areas to pay depending on how much information is in the you want in the environment, how new it is and how novel it is, and how much it looks like a competitive experience. So up in the top left-hand corner, you've got lots of new information, but it's not particularly representative competition. I call that sort of virtuous variety. That's entertainment. It's fun, right? We're having a great time doing that. You're not necessarily getting a lot of learning out of it, but it's a good time. So that's definitely the kind of burger type experience. And then if you come further down, and we see down to the left-hand side, at the bottom left-hand quadrant, you'll see relentless repetition drilling. That's where there's not any information, and it doesn't really look like the competition at all or the game, and then therefore we're just doing something for the kind of almost like for the sake of doing it, right? Now there may be a role for that, but I mean I struggle to see what it is, and I desperately try to be in that space, but there are some contexts where that might be appropriate. So I'm not going to say that's not the case. I just think it needs to be very, very liberally used. It's overused. It needs to be used a lot less. And then you have successful stability. Now that might be where you're very, very near to playing in your competition. You don't want to do anything too new. You don't want to destabilize the athlete too much. You just want them to sort of repeat something, but you put them into a context that's as close to the competitive environment as possible, so they're almost going through that dress rehearsal. But you don't want to stretch them too much so they're going to feel like, oh God, I can't do this anymore. You want to maintain confidence levels. And the area that I tend to try and operate in the most is the top right quadrant, the desirable difficulty, because that's rich with learning. And I'll flex my activities somewhere going towards virtuous variety, sometimes more towards successful stability, but generally speaking, just trying to get the stretch point right around that desirable difficulty. So there's always some learning in place. Now I'm working with young athletes in the main, and it's about a learning journey, and I'm never that bothered about competitive demands on the weekend. I'm fortunate I don't have to be bothered about that. And I believe in a 10-year learning journey, and I think we're going to get some really good outcomes as a result of that. So I'm trying to stay in that space where possible and not get dragged into, oh, we've got to do this week because we need to win on the weekend. But I understand that's how some people have to work. I'm just sharing with you my model. This idea of the funnel of variability is another tool I used, and this is where I give you the typology of practices. In field hockey, I use these terms. They might resonate with you: a full game, a small-sided game, unit play, variable practice, opposed practice, unopposed practice, and then your drill. The difference between unopposed practice and drill is a drill is where it's completely pre-mapped, whereas an unopposed practice, there's no one to play against, but you can go where you want to. And there might be people in the space, and you might have to avoid them. Now, what you see on the left-hand side is information sources inviting action. They call them affordances. You might have heard that term, but you can just call them what you like. But they're information sources inviting action. In a full game, there's loads. And as you get closer towards a drill, there's far less. And some of them are mapped out. And it's about trying to find the sweet spot of enough information to be able to allow the players to attend to whatever it is they need to attend to, without overloading them with too much information. If you only ever played a full game, there'd be too much going on and they wouldn't necessarily be able to attend to things. So by reducing the information sources down, you can actually then create an opportunity for them to do more of the kind of repetition without repetition. And they get an opportunity to explore different movement possibilities before moving them back up. Now, with this funnel, one of the things I see a lot of is people, so you can use like whole part whole, for example, where you go full game or something like a small-sided game down to, say, an unopposed practice, and you come back to the small-sided game. Well, if you look at the amount of information that there is in there, it's too much. It's too big a jump. So I propose to you, when you're designing your practices, what you might want to look at is small-sided game or a full game. Go smaller, go smaller, go smaller, go smaller. Come back, come back, come back, come in little micro jumps, maybe over 2 or 3 sessions. You don't have to do everything in the session. And so what I talk about, instead of whole part whole or practice play or play practice play, I talk about whole, less of the whole, less of the whole, less of the whole, more of the whole, more of the whole, more of the whole, more of the whole, and design it that way by using little modifications and adaptations. How do I do that? Well, by being intentional about where I am in the space. So are we exploring? Are we exploiting? Are we executing? If we're exploring, then there's lots of opportunities for action. We're going to discover lots of different things. Then we might narrow down and begin to exploit. We're going to execute. And that can happen in one session. Or we can spend a whole session exploring. Then we can refine down to another session where we might say, well, we're going to select a few things that we discovered in exploration. You try and exploit them and become better with them. And then we're going to go into a full-on execution phase. And then we're going to go into competition. And this is just a little framework that I use to help me think, right, where am I? And what am I trying to do in this session? Or what am I trying to do in this part of the session? And then I also use this little idea of like a mixing desk. Coach is a DJ. I like to think of myself as a DJ. I'm not a DJ, but I like to think of myself as a DJ. And I like to think that I've got a mixing desk and I'm going to live in the moment. I'm going to change with my mixing desk. I'm going to use space, task, equipment, and people. So think of STEP, right, as an easy reminder. How can I measure? What can I do with space? How can I change the shape, the size, the way people interact in that space? What can I do within that world? What can I do with a task? Can I change the rules? Can I change what they're trying to achieve? Can I change the mission? Can I change what they're able to utilize with it? What aspects of the way they're able to move within that environment? What can the opponents do that the one team can't do? What can the in possession team do that the out of possession team can do? What can we do with equipment? How can you constrain the use of equipment? I quite often play a lot of games where you can only use the forehand side of, we turn a stick over in field hockey, but I play a lot of games you can only use the forehand, only use the reverse hand, use a bigger stick, a bigger ball, a different type of ball, a tennis ball. What can we do with the people in the space? How can we constrain them? Can we limit their movements? Can we limit the number of them? Can we give them individual challenges and tasks to determine what they can do? Can we make some of them superheroes? Can we give them kind of superpowers? And all these different ideas that I put into my game design, and I'm flexing throughout the session as I'm trying to tweak it to get that stretch point just right. So this is a bit of a planning model that I use. This is a game which was called Elimination Extravaganza, which I delivered Sarah Kelleher, who's absolutely amazing. She's the under-18s field hockey coach, national field hockey coach for the under-18 girls. Absolutely off the scale, amazing coach. Been on the show a couple of times. Highly recommend checking her out. We designed this game, and it was about creativity and it was about elimination. And you can see as you look through the page, I've determined where I'm going. I'm pure exploratory. There's going to be loads of variability. It's going to be really quite representative, not fully representative, but quite representative. I've determined, importantly, in the session outcome, what the problems that I want I'm thinking that the players might need to solve. So I'm not thinking about the movements they might need to do or the solutions they might have. It's the problems that they need to solve. And then I'm designing the game activity in the whole, and then the part element, and then what communication we might use and what differentiation tools and how we might engage them, and then what constraints I might use and what attractors I might use. A constraint is where you limit movement, and attractor is where you put something in place that encourages a particular movement. An example of that might be you might say, oh, you've only got 3 touches. That's a constraint. On the other hand, you might say you get a bonus point if you can move the ball on within 3 touches. It's a subtle difference, but you'll be amazed at how different it is in terms of the behavior of the athletes. So just to give you a few examples of what's going on in the garden at the moment, a game to a game. So this is my little boy. We're playing hockey squash. We've already played a game of hockey squash, and now he has decided to take it upon himself to work on a few actions. And you can see him sort of working together, improving, trying to practice. So he's got his own little game, and his own little game here is he's trying to do as many consecutive good ones as he possibly can. You see, he's now starting to improve. See how he's getting better, right? And now we're in the game, and this is when he gets a lesson and a schooling from his mean old man. But he's starting to do different movements, and it's fun. And we play that for a couple of hours, and that's just because we're sort of limited. But then, you know, you can create all sorts of different games. This is a game he invented for himself. We've got quite a fairly small garden, and he's found this piece of wood, and he's right, I'm going to do this like long jump challenge, completely of his own making. And then he said to me, how can I get better? And I start to just throw a few constraints in. Here's a few examples. I put a little bit of wood there just to see if I can encourage him to sort of stretch out further, but it really put him off. Found it quite challenging, but you can see he's really working through it. He's trying to find his footing. He throws his footing off because he's trying to find the right way to land. He's got the wrong foot, so he's discovering things. I'm not saying a word, I'm just filming. Nope. He's discovering, learning. He asked me, do you think I need to go back further? Do you think I need to run up better? Do I pace it out? So we explored a few of those things, and we discovered different things. Then I put this box in the way to make him jump higher. That was the first go. That was a little bit scary for him, freaked him out. And this is something we did for an hour and a half on it was a weekend. There we go. That's where I am. I just wanted to leave enough time for questions. I've gone on for far too long. We haven't got an awful lot of time, I'm afraid. But if you want to find out more about what I'm doing, head over to the site. You can get involved there, and you can catch me on Twitter, and I'm talking about loads of things. And now I will stop sharing.
That was really, really great, Stuart. I liked how you put the videos of your son in there. I was going to bring that up.
He's my n equals 1 experiment, the poor boy.
That's what kids are for.
So we got one question from Coach Lucas. He was, and you brought it up a little bit within your talk, with creating games for kids during practice. How many times have you left it up to the kids to create their own games, and you suggest rules for the game? So I know you brought it up with the games design type stuff. How often?
Yeah, I do a bit of both, actually. Sometimes I will. What I've found though is that it's quite difficult for them initially. They're not kind of used to it. So I sometimes have to act as a little bit of a stimulus. But there's been times when I've started with a kind of little, like an informal, just sort of, kind of a starter, an arrival practice, because they're all arriving at different stages. So it's like a little arrival game, and off they go. And then that's morphed into something else, and I've just gone with it. So I do that quite a bit. In general, because of the problem solving, it happens anyway. Whether I start the game or whether the game emerges as something else because the athletes are saying to me, what if we did this or what if we did that? I've encouraged my son to get involved in game design, but he comes up with some of the things that are so complicated that it's like almost impossible to design. But one thing I would say as a little tip for everybody as well is if it takes you longer than 10 seconds to describe your game, it's too complicated. So whatever the game is you want to get to, fine. Start really, really simple and then add levels in. Level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, and then you eventually get to your big complicated game, but they feel like they've just flowed into it. and it helps you get going really quickly as well.
That's that captivating video game design that kids just want to keep coming back to, so, 1 week to the next. I think that's one of the things that we see is some of our coaches just aren't patient enough. They want to get to the solution. I know I can be that way as well.
Yeah.
So, you have to let the kids you have to have patience, let them solve some problems. They'll get to it. As long as you're willing to step back and let them explore a bit.
I mean, and that's a good point. That's a good point, actually, is we do get a bit hooked on trying to get somewhere in the session.
Yeah.
And when you're working in this way, sometimes you have to allow it to marinate. It's like a good sauce. Let the flavor come out. Let it get, and then it eventually. So sometimes you stay with it for a little while, and then you're tweaking and merging, you're adjusting, you're making little adaptations, and then you see this breakthrough coming. And it doesn't always happen then and there. I actually used to go like it if the kids used to go away all with smiling faces. Now I like it if they're just a little bit disgruntled. Because it means they're thinking about it. They're not quite there.
Can't wait to get back.
Exactly.
So, Stu, I know you talk a little bit about constraints and kind of you have the attractors within the presentation, but I think sometimes we're constraining to just to constrain. Yeah. And I know you've gone on a couple talks on that. Can you kind of chat about that topic?
Well, this goes back to the point about intentionality or being intentional, right? So if you're clear about what you're trying to do in your session, so for example, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? What kind of information should be present in the environment to enable the athletes or players to sort of, it's the clues they're going to get, yeah? So the information are the clues, right? And what I feel like sometimes I'm doing is I'm kind of narrowing down the available possibilities so that the clues become more obvious. Now, if you're intentional about that, what you then do is you put constraints in that allow the players to see where the clues are. You may even sort of direct attention sometimes into those spaces, right? But you're sort of guiding where they're searching and where they're looking for the problems. Sometimes, though, if you're constraining to constrain, then you're not doing that. All you're doing is you're creating a limitation. Now, it may be that you're creating a limitation to bring about a behavior change. That's okay, but it's more powerful if that constraint is there to draw attention to where solutions might be found. Now, it takes a bit of doing and a bit of working through, and you find yourself adjusting sometimes in the activity. So that's one thing you do have to understand as well. Rarely does the activity go according to plan. You're nearly always adapting on the fly to tweak it, change it, flex it, put new rules in, because there's sometimes the kids just don't see it. It's almost like, could you not see the clue? That's just right in front of your face, but they're in the game and they can't. So you have to sometimes pull out. You have to sometimes make the attractor so strong. So like sometimes you're going like 10 points if the ball goes into this zone, and and it's like, and even then that's not strong enough an attract. 25 points, but that's an attractor. That's what gets them to think about where they might need to move and coordinate in order to be able to be successful in the game.
And I know you've hit on, and kind of my thinking was when constraining to afford you, if we want to work on offense, you're constraining the offense, but really it's the opposite. You want to maybe constrain defensive situations to promote more offense. Can you kind of talk about that? Yeah.
So it's an obvious thing, isn't it? And I've done this myself. I'm quite an attack-minded coach, so I quite often will work with the attack, and we'll create all sorts of great ideas about how we're going to these poor sap defenders, and we're going to score loads of goals. I've been doing it wrong for a while. If I want the attack to become really good at attack, I give the task to the defenders, because what I'm looking for is for the attacking group to adapt and react to what the defenders are doing. So for example, if a group of defenders coordinate in a certain way and create this really compact zone, and like playing in like half press, and they're making it very difficult for them to be broken down, that creates an attacking adaptation. They need to shift the ball to space. They need to move it with pace. They need to be intentional in that. Their movement ahead of the ball needs to be really good. Or conversely, if I, for example, overload the defending group and say, right, you guys are going to go on a like super aggressive press really high up the field, that creates the in possession group with a different task. They've got to then deal with that, find a way to counterattack, find a way to find a space behind. So one approach to that is to think about almost think in reverse and give the tasks to the other side to bring and the best bit about that is you actually get then the best of both worlds, because your defensive group get really good at stuff and then the attacking group get really good at like working that out. I've seen this before, right? We need to switch this on. So your tactical planning emerges as a result of that. It's what they call a shared affordances. They actually develop a connection and and almost like an implicit understanding of how to deal with that scenario because they've seen it before. And you don't have to shout on the sideline, they're doing a deep press, you've got to move out and spread out. And not, when you're shouting to yourself and no one can hear you. And that horrible moment that we've all been there, and when they do it for themselves and they work it out and you hear them saying it and you hear them connecting with each other, spread, wide, eagle, or whatever codes you've used, then you've got a team that's really going to be quite skillful and very difficult to beat.
So we did have a couple of questions that came in from the audience. We got one from Chi out west, and I think a lot of coaches that operate like this have done a good job in designing games, and they really want to structure their practices like this. But what are the comments that you've seen from parents about these types of practices? And then how do you answer them? Because it just looks so different than what their expectations are.
Yeah, it's the most common question I get. And because it is so different from what's expected, most parents are looking for something that looks a bit like school, I think. That's what they're paying for. They're looking for structure, order. It's got to be neat, tidy. There's got to be cones everywhere. Beautiful. Whistles, clipboards. I'm in. I'm all in. I'm handing over my money and I'm happy. And then you go along to one of our sessions and it looks like chaos and everybody just arrives and balls are flying everywhere and they're all having, it's like, whoa. So I do think if you think that you can just expect parents who are very important stakeholders and very, emotionally invested in their child's experience, whether, not all of them are necessarily there because they want their children to be world beaters. Some are, but some are also there because they want to have a really good time, to learn something and go away with a, decent experience. To think that they shouldn't be involved in understanding something about the experience that you provide, the product you have to offer, it's a bit, it's not really on, is it? You wouldn't do that to any other customer scenario. Come and buy my magic elixir. What does it do? You don't need to know. How does it make you better? You don't need to know that either. Just buy it and trust me. No, it's not right, is it? You're a snake oil salesman if you do that. So I think you've got to bring them on the journey. And I talk about selling the why a lot. We have in my club, we have like a document that basically says, we work this way. I think it's on my website somewhere in the documents area. We work this way, and this is what you will expect. This is what you should see. We do it for these reasons, and we, believe in this wholeheartedly. If you ever see us deviate from this, please tell us. If you have any challenges, please tell us. This is what we want you to hold us accountable to providing the best possible experience possible. We also hope you will be held accountable to ensure that you do the things that you need to do, because there's a bit of a deal here behaviorally, and also the children's expectations on that. And I've been very fortunate, I think, that most people who come in have bought in. I know I've lost a few because that's not what they've expected, so they've gone elsewhere. That's no problem. I'm happy with that. But that's what that's our environment. And I know lots of other coaches do have had similar challenges as well in other sports, where they constantly feel like they're having to almost like sell the why. But you know what? I think that's important. And eventually we'll get past that. And then people will be like expecting it to look this way. Weirdly though, I found now what I'm finding is that a lot of parents get involved as well. This is a really good recruitment vehicle for coaches. So we need volunteers, we need helpers. And I've had some parent coaches a bit afraid of getting involved. So I don't know enough, I'm not technical enough, this, that, and the other. And I say, yeah, but you can referee a game, can't you? And if I was to ask you to change the rules a little bit just to make it a bit easier or harder, you could do that, couldn't you? And they go, yeah, no, that's it. What? That's it? Oh, I can do that. And then I get them in, and then that's the end of their lives because I've got them hooked into my world.
So we got a question from Coach Doug. He was wondering about, do you have example activities in the desirable difficulty learning category and the successful stability performing category. Do you recommend spending more time in the desirable difficulty area?
So again, that is based on kind of my context. So my context is predominantly a learning context, and I'm on this sort of ongoing learning journey with athletes, and therefore I'm looking to try and create something with the desirable difficulty built in. I never want it to be too easy for them. I want them to always be an element of stretch. That's not always true. Sometimes I'll make it, we'll play, we'll have fun. When it comes to the stability side, that's usually where I'm going to do something that they've seen before and they've done before. So we might play a scenario game that they know what it is, and I'll say to them, right, we're going to do Barcelona today, and they'll know exactly what the game is, and they'll go into the game and they'll have seen it before, and they'll know how to play it, and they'll know what they're trying to achieve. There's nothing necessarily new, and they know there's a particular outcome they're working towards, and we work on those sorts of things. And it's really because I want them to that's usually something I'll do as a preparation activity for maybe a competitive event we've got coming up. I don't want to load them in with too much stuff. I don't want to load too much learning. Just want to get them to refine things that they've done before. We did an activity prior to a tournament we were in, which was all about designed. It was all about designed around how we coordinate our counter press. So how can we trap the opponents in certain areas to launch counter presses? And they've done it before. They'd seen it before. That's what we were trying to achieve.
Interesting question from Coach Tim. He was like, when creating games for kids, and you have a wide variety of skill levels or in your group, do you put them together or similar abilities, or do you let them figure it out on their own? And how do you deal with that?
A bit of both. I'm a big believer in, it's not one size fits all. In general, it's mixed. In general, it sort of self-selects to a certain extent, because when they partner up for certain your one-to-one activities, they often partner up with somebody who is of a similar ability, which sort of naturally sort of creates itself. If I see mismatches, sometimes I'll change things so that one person isn't just being trounced by another. When it comes to game activity, sometimes we will break up into separate groups, but more often than not, we'll try and keep it together. I'm not a big fan of, particularly with young individuals who are on who've got different developmental trajectories. I'm not a big fan of setting out a thing, you're in the A squad, you're in the B squad, you're in the C squad, because that creates some what I call almost like a double-edged sword of challenges. The A squad think, hey, I'm the A squad, I can do things. Then you start to see some really dangerous behaviors, and they start almost thinking that they don't necessarily have to work quite as hard. And the C squad think, well, I'm never going to be as good as the A squad. And then they go through that kind of self-fulfilling mentality of, oh, I'm never going to get there. But actually, it's really just usually it's about experience levels. Some have been playing longer. Some have got older brothers who they've been battered by, and they've got better as a result of that. And they've had a lot more game time. Some have got parents who've played before, so they've played. So it's just experience levels. So we try and mix it up wherever we can. And then what you find then is that you see kids really accelerate out of nowhere. And because they've been able to mix it with the kind of more able kids, we do quite a bit of mixed age group stuff as well. So we don't always train in the same age. I'll throw the 12s up with the 14s. I'll throw some of the 14s in with the 12s. We'll mix up the teams so that you've got some 12s and 14s working together. Sometimes I'll play the 12s against the 14s. I'm working with that age group at the moment. So we do try and mix it up. And it's not an exact science. They do compete in their age group, so that's just the way it is. But I'm never that fussed about that. And actually, what I find is they get some really interesting challenges it's quite interesting when you see a group of under 14s get annihilated by a group of under 12s, and what happens to their kind of mentality and how everything goes out the window and the stress they're under. There's something really valuable about that as a learning experience. I wouldn't recommend it all the time, but it does work sometimes. So yeah, we very much mix it up. It's a very mixed diet.
Great.
So we probably have maybe two more questions. One, as a coach, and we were talking about decisions that these players are making during the game, and that's, having the context. Can you count the amount of decisions that they're making in a game? Do you think no? Well,
there's some really good research on this about what they call ultra fast cognition, because the decisions aren't observable. Not all of the decisions are observable, and not all of the not everything that's happening within a human organism necessarily comes out in behavior. So we can see a relatively small amount. Well, we can infer decisions. So we can think that an individual may have acted in a certain way based on a certain source of information. But more often than not, what we're trying to do is we're trying to equate our perspective on theirs. We can't see through their eyes, so we can't see the amount of decisions that are being made. We know if an environment is more decision rich than another. That's obvious by the way it's designed. And we're looking for decision rich environments wherever we possibly can. But also when it comes to cognition, there is this idea that it's not just about the brain. The entire body is involved in the decision-making process because we feel, we sense. How many times have you been, you like been in involvement and you just sort of sense that something's there even though you hadn't seen it? You knew it before it was there. It's all that we're tapping into, and that's linked to the decision-making process and part of that kind of cognitive process. And that level of awareness is a really interesting area that I'm exploring at the moment, which is how can I devise an environment where I'm looking at how the athlete is aware? How aware are they of what's around them? And what are they utilizing to raise their level of awareness beyond just their eyes? What can they hear? What can they feel? What can they sense? What are they creating through connection? And that's a really interesting area. There's a lot of research emerging on that. That's if you're a particular geek like me and you want to delve into, and it's heavy duty, but there's some very interesting stuff out there about that.
How do you facilitate asking those questions to those athletes and getting the feedback from them?
Well, that's good one, right? So a number of different ways. I used to play the whole coach guessing game, right? So I have the right answer. Here is a question. You got to fire out just words until you get something that makes me look like I'm happy. Communication, work together. They give me all it's like a bingo, we've all been there, and they cotton onto that one pretty quickly. So I don't play the bingo guessing game anymore. I use quite interesting questions, right? So, you got what they call convergent questions, which are directed towards a particular point, or there's divergent questions where there's any possible answer. So I'm trying to be more divergent with my questioning. So my favorite question, for example, is what did you notice? You can't answer that question wrong apart from to say nothing, because it basically then means you haven't really been engaged in the process of what's the information sources. But if they do say nothing, it usually tells me something about my practice design. So we talk about, so what I often use is what I might call like a priming question. So I might say, what is this game asking you to do? Or what is it in the game that you can do that will help you achieve the mission? So they go there with something to consider. So when they come back, I'll say, what did you notice? Well, I noticed this, I noticed that. That's interesting. Right, let's just attend to that thing. Go back in and attend to whatever it is that you've noticed. And then we'll explore in more depth what it is about that you might need to be doing. And so the questions are more linked. They're a little bit like attractor questions. They're like sort of directing gaze, directing search. And what I'm hoping that will happen is that they'll come back to me with that. Now, it doesn't always work, because sometimes I have been in sessions where it's taken me a whole hour. And I've said, well, what did you notice? And they'll say, we've got to communicate more. And I just sigh a little bit, and go, okay, no, back in again. Think about it again, right? What is the mission? What are we trying to achieve? What is it in this game that you're asking to be challenged by? Off you go. Come back in. What did you notice? Yeah, we need to communicate more. Okay, right, let's try again. I did that for an hour, but it was worth it, right? And I was being observed at the time, and somebody said, you should have moved it on. They were starting to lose engagement, and they were struggling. But I thought, no, this is worth it. There's value in this struggle. I'm staying there. I'm not going to be afraid of the struggle. Let's stay in the struggle. And we stayed and we stayed. And at the end of it, it started to happen. We started to see it, and they started to connect with it. And they came back to me and they said, we see it. We see it now. It's this. Yes, it's that. An hour. But, sometimes that's where you got to be.
Ken, do you have a question before we have?
No, I would just be respectful of Stuart's time here. We've kept him on for an hour and 20 minutes already. So, just enjoy our time, enjoy listening. You may not get to hear us every week, but we certainly get to hear you, which I think a lot of us look forward to. So just thank you for what you do.
Well, there's a show coming out this week, which I highly recommend people listen to. Fabulous lady based over on the West Coast called Kathy Sierra, who trains horses using constraints. So how do you help change behavior when you can't talk to? And honestly, it's mind blowing. You might be saying, "Oh, horses, whatever." Genuinely, everything she talks about, you think, "I could do that. I could do that. I could do that." It's really, really, really fascinating. So highly recommend listening to that one when I finally get to edit it and publish it.
Yeah.
So we usually ask all our guests one question at the very end. If you had a time machine and you went back in time to talk to young Stuart Armstrong, coach just getting started, what would you tell him?
You sprung that one on me, Dave.
I know, sorry. Didn't put that in the notes.
That's a doozy. What would I say to myself?
This is going to have to be part 2. I guess you're going to have to come back on.
Yeah, well, you're right. No, I tell you what I would say to myself. I'd say to myself, don't be in such a rush. There's value in the struggle. And I'd also say to myself, get your hair cut. Because I'm holding on to whatever I've got right now, but back then I see some of the photos. Good Lord, what? Oh my, ridiculous. Get a haircut, I'd have said to myself, definitely.
Okay, awesome. I just want to thank everybody that joined us on USA Hockey webinar series presented by Pure Hockey and BioSteel. Tomorrow we have Dr. Dean Creelars, who's going to talk about player development and effectively putting physical literacy within your practice design. So that's going to be a great one. He's a world leading expert in physical literacy. Thursday we have Steve Thompson, our ADM manager for goaltending, and then on Friday we have Seth Appert, coach of our U.S. national team development program team, and he's going to talk about practice philosophy. So really great, Stuart. Really appreciate your time. Much appreciated. I feel like with 142 episodes, I know you. We speak to you every week. I just don't talk, so it's very normal. So, but thanks
again. Absolutely my pleasure, and I absolutely love the work you're doing. So I'm just glad to be a little part of it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.